Welcome to the interview section of MIHAS International, and of course, as always, thanks to Gabby Ray for all the latest local and national news. Now, today's guest is Don Lavender. He's a psychotherapist and program director for Camino Recovery, and this is based in Estepona area. He specialises in treatment for varying addictions, the Camino Recovery itself does, and he's the program director. He's an American psychotherapist with more than 30 years experience in clinical management and consultative positions as well. He's worked in some really well-known treatment centres, including the Priory UK hospitals and Sierra Tucson, Arizona. And at Sierra Tucson, he was the director of the family program and established the new 70-bed eating disorder facility. Don is best known for his pioneering work in equine-assisted psychotherapy, and he helped develop this in US treatment centres some 20 years ago. But we're going to talk about that later on in the programme. Don's also a member of the Federation of Drug and Alcohol Practitioners, and he does specialise in an eye movement I think it's called desensitisation treatment, which obviously I'm not the person to explain that to you. So it's a big welcome to Don. Hello, Don.
Hi, thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for taking the time to come and see us. And also, sort of like in the next 15 or 20 minutes, explaining exactly what you do at Camino Recovery. First of all, though, sort of what brought you here to Spain to be able to, to think about doing this over here?
Well, the thing that brought me to Spain, myself and my wife, we were thinking about, after doing consultancy work for places like Priory, other addiction treatment centers in the UK, we were thinking about opening a center in Surrey or west of London, out in the country. And we did imagine that it might be better if people detoxed and did treatment in the sun.
Yes.
And the coast of Spain is beautiful. And it's just a lovely environment year-round. And we thought this would be a nice place. And again, this part of the world is only about 2.5-hour flight from most of Europe.
Yes, that's very true. It's very central. And yes, the sunshine always makes you feel better, doesn't it, when you see it there shining in the sky. Now, Camino Recovery, you have residential, you have outpatients, and also family programs as well. Now, just for our viewers, what type of addictions do you deal with?
We deal with all kinds of addictions. And an addiction is basically when you do something, you're out of control, you have negative consequences because of the behavior, and you continue the behavior despite the negative consequences. It's something you cannot control. And that can be alcohol, drugs, not only illicit or illegal drugs, but it could be prescription medication. It can be behavioral, sexual addiction, gambling, work.
Workaholism, I noticed that on your list.
Well, there are people that they don't know how to leave the office at the office. They take it home and they just don't stop.
I know, and that would stress not only themselves, but their family as well, wouldn't it? You know, in family time.
Well, it's an excellent point to say that it stresses them as well as their family. And whenever confronted, in typical addict fashion, you confront Dad. Well, Dad, you work too much. You're at the office. Well, you like this house we live in. You like this neighborhood. You like the school. You like the car. You like the clothes. And, it's like, I'm doing this for you. Yes. So there's always a comeback. And the thing that we say is, you never step between an addict and their drug of choice unless you're ready to take it on.
Ah, right.
Because they will defend themselves.
Yes, I suppose. Oh, and I suppose you'd need quite a lot of training in that as well, wouldn't you, to be able to take that on?
Well, and to gently guide the person to understanding why they're doing what they're doing. Because it isn't to harm others, even though others do suffer. It's just taking a look at what are you medicating? What are you trying to cover?
Okay.
What prompted you to step into this kind of a particular addictive behavior?
In the first place, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I suppose that brings us to really one of my questions. People are always saying, oh, they have an addictive nature. You know, why do some people become addicted and some don't? Is it in their genes? Were they in the wrong place at the wrong time? You know, there's all sorts of things out there trying to find out why people go down a particular road. But I suppose it could be a mixture of everything, couldn't it?
It is a mixture of a lot of things, and the argument of nature or nurture has been around for quite some time. And rather than focus on what's the cause, we more focus on how do we solve this, or how do we give you the tools to fix this, how to get into recovery and maintain a level of recovery that can work for you as well as the people you're closest to. And you know, not only am I American, I'm half Native American. I'm 2 Native American grandfathers that were both active alcoholics. I'm convinced, well, I'm convinced it's genetic. They did not deal with fire water.
Very well.
They didn't do it. And it's just, they weren't bad people. It was just the way their brain is wired. And, you know, if you're right-handed or left-handed, it doesn't make you bad.
No.
It's just the way your brain is wired. I mean, this is one example of how people are.
Of how people are. And I did notice on your website that you have different types of treatment. You've got like 5 steps. There was the 5 steps there. Perhaps just to mention briefly what they are.
What we do at Camino Recovery is we work with basically 5 main areas. The reason we've picked these 5 is it happens to be the most effective thing for the largest number of people. And it's people that have worked in the addictions industry, for example, they've found it was a bit ridiculous to teach someone, well, alcohol is your problem, I'll teach you to put the plug in the jug and you'll stop drinking and everything will be fine. Well, it's not that simple. It's more complicated than that. And what was called dual diagnosis years ago is now called, the psychobabble term is called comorbidity. What
does that mean?
Well, comorbidity means that there's a lot of issues going on other than just drink or drugs. Or a compulsive behavior that I'm doing. There's a lot of things that factor in, and we address those. In the 5 things, we do a basic Hazelden 12-step fellowship type program approach. In those 12 steps, it's along the line of self-help, but self-help with the help of others. We often refer people to 12-step fellowships, such as Alcoholics Anonymous, when they get out of treatment. And that's to utilize a network of support. But Hazelden 12-step approach, we also do family systems work. Addiction is not the disease that belongs to an individual. It belongs to the family system as a whole. Oftentimes people, you know, they'll throw the net over the drug addict and throw them in rehab, and they say, fix them. And we say, well, we have a family component. We have a family program I want you to come to so you can get some information, education, learn what you've been doing. You know, and mom and dad, parents often always are guilt-ridden, thinking, what did I do? It's my fault that my child is this way. No, it isn't the parent's fault, because the person they themselves have done this. And it's not that we blame the person, but we do give that person responsibility of getting better. And the family component is so important because family, they often contribute by enabling the person to stay active in their unhealthy behavior or on their unhealthy choices. And they don't know any better. It's not like they're purposefully trying to harm someone.
No.
It's important that they get some information on how have you enabled them? And now, with your new choices, now you can enable them to make healthy choices.
Yes, yeah, sort of, yes, because they're not to blame for it. It's something that's subconscious that was affecting the person that's taking the drug. And, you know, over 30 years of doing this work, what I've heard many times is families saying, well, I'm not coming. I don't want to do that. I've had enough. I'm finished. And
also heard many times, I'm not going to go there and talk about my issues. I'm not going to air our dirty laundry in front of other family members. But when it's multiple families, what they learn is they're all in the same boat. They're all experiencing the same things.
Yeah.
And
they're not unique in that.
No, they're not. They're not. And but they learn that they can all do very similar things to get well and get healthier and support their family member. Because those that don't get that family program, those that don't get that education, that information, they often fall prey to repeating the same old negative self-defeating patterns that everyone falls into. They're happy when the person leaves rehab, they come home and everything's wonderful for a couple of months. And then people start to fall in the pattern because the family members are really uncomfortable with the person that's found a new recovery. They don't know how to deal. They're not used to them being happy and healthy.
Yeah, and making great decisions and being sure of themselves, not so insecure, I suppose.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and getting back to the original question about the 5 things we do, another thing we do is EMDR, which is eye movement desensitization and reprocessing.
Yeah, that sounds really different.
Well, a psychologist in California in the late 80s by the name of Francine Shapiro created this stuff. And EMDR is a poor name for it. What it truly is bilateral stimulation. And science is more and more discovering exactly how it works. But in this bilateral stimulation it moves people from holding on to traumas that are housed in the midbrain or the limbic system, and moving it out of the limbic system into the neocortex, into the frontal lobe, so that I can come to the realization that an example that's a traumatic event is auto accidents. Some people get in an auto accident, it's so bad I can no longer drive. It was such a horrific experience, I can't even ride in a car anymore. And some people get this EMDR, this trauma resolution work accomplished in a short period of time, and they do realize that yes, it was a bad experience, yes, it happened, but that's a part of life. I need to move on. I need to get on with life. And they go back to riding in cars. They go back to driving.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of trauma involved in addiction, both to the person that's continually re-traumatizing themselves by using, and also the family members are traumatized. And what we've discovered is, you would say, you might ask, what's the addiction that you treat most of all?
Yeah, that was one of my questions.
Well, one of the things that we do treat most of all, connected to addiction, is trauma. And those that have worked in this industry for decades have gradually discovered that one of the biggest contributors to relapse, and relapse is a problem because a lot of people go through rehab, they do well for a couple of years, and they relapse.
And then they go back to
back to using. It's discovered that one of the biggest contributors to relapse is trauma. And one of the biggest contributors to trauma is unaddressed or unresolved. One of the biggest contributors to relapse is stress.
Oh, stress, yeah.
And the biggest contributor to stress is unaddressed trauma.
Okay, yeah. So they sort of like in hand, really, aren't they?
They are, and what we do is we help people address that. We help people go back to the source. And it isn't as, it's like, well, Mom put me sideways on the potty when she was training me, and I've been messed up ever since. It's more complicated than that.
Yeah.
But we help people understand this is the trauma, this is how you address it, and this is how you move forward from there.
Okay.
And I don't want to make EMDR the miracle cure, but ages ago, back in the late 80s, when I did trauma resolution therapy with people with talk therapy, sometimes you'd work with a client for as long as 7 years. And in this day and age, with this type and kind of trauma resolution work, it's amazing what you can do in a dozen sessions.
Really?
Really.
Yeah. And of course, you were saying families sometimes sort of like throw the person in to the treatment centre and say, fix them. But of course, it has to come from the person. They have to want to fix themselves, don't they?
They do. I mean, their level of commitment is important.
Yeah.
They have to want to. And I've never met anyone who had a problem with substance, alcohol, chemicals.
That didn't
or
want,
didn't. Yeah, I never met anybody that was in the midst of that behavior thinking, well, this is a good idea.
No, I was, yeah, and I was just wondering, sort of like, you know, if they're still in denial when they come to you, it might take a bit longer. And if they've already decided, look, this is something that I can't help myself with, I need help, then those 12 sessions, you know, it can be done, can't it? It
can be done,
yeah.
But one of the things that's important is there's almost a street credibility with therapists that they themselves are recovering addicts. Because when it comes to delusion or denial, you know, the therapist can sit there and smile and say, been there, done that.
Yes.
But also when you're sitting in a group of people that are in the same boat, they really have no personal investment in enabling the person to stay active in their own denial. They confront each other, they talk each other, and they really don't want anything from each other than that connection and that support. And so being honest, you know, it's so important in a group.
Now, something else that you're well known for, as we were saying earlier, is your work in equine-assisted psychotherapy, and you helped to develop this in US treatment centres about 20 years ago. How did you get involved with equine therapy?
I didn't want to at
you
first.
Didn't want to?
Well, what they found out is, they found out that I grew up on a farm. And I grew up around animals.
Yeah.
And as far as horses went, I was bitten and kicked and stepped on and all that stuff as a kid. And when I left the farm, I had no desire to go around animals. And I was, at the time, I was working in a psychiatric hospital that was an addiction treatment center as well in Arizona. And this place started in the 80s, the 1980s, from a dude ranch where they had horses, and they would go, you know, they would take the city slickers out on the trail rides in the desert. Well, we had a whole stable full of horses, so we kept the horses. And we started to work with the horses. And this was in the late 80s, early 90s, we started doing this. There was a woman that came to work for the company by the name of Barbara Rector. And she had done a number of different programs in the United States working with mentally, physically, emotionally handicapped children. Now, there have been these kind of programs in the UK, for example, for the last 80 years. It's been around for a long time. And Barbara was brought in to help develop a different kind of a program with adolescents. And it turns out that, you know, they were getting these adolescents to take responsibility, connect with the animals, muck out the stalls, start to do exercises with them. We did some things on horseback, but gradually we went to everything was on the ground with this work. And it's all about join up. It's all about connection. And I mentioned earlier about trauma resolution. Traumas are housed in the midbrain or the limbic system. When you see a brain in the lab and it's sitting in a glass tank, that's the neocortex, or it's called gray matter. Well, inside is the limbic system or the midbrain. It is the mammal or mammalian brain wrapped around the reptilian brain. Now that midbrain is hundreds of millions of years old, whereas the neocortex part is only about 250,000 years old. But the trauma is housed in the midbrain. And the midbrain or the limbic system is a part of the brain that the horse has that's big in comparison to the rest of its brain, even though a horse's brain is only about the size of the horse's eyeball. But what humans do is we think all the time. And horses don't get caught up in think. They more feel. And what's important to a horse is join up or connection. Safety in numbers, connection to the herd, that's safety. Where humans want to talk and have eye contact and figure things out. Horses just want to join. They just want to connect. And what horses do is they mirror or they reflect the emotional state in humans. Human beings often, particularly those that are in treatment centers, in recovery, trying to stop addictions, trying to remove themselves from their trauma so they can recover, they're trying to think their way through this, where horses help the humans get in touch with their own emotional state.
Yeah.
And part of that is it's a instinctual thing. It's, again, safety in numbers. Kind of the question we ask clients is, do you think a horse knows if you're afraid? And everybody goes, yeah. And the next question, do you think the horse knows what you're afraid of? And I say, well, no. And the horse doesn't know. They just know that you're afraid. And if a horse has allowed you to get near it, and you haven't killed the horse and eaten the horse, then you are, for all practical purposes, you're a member of the herd. And if any member of the herd is frightened or afraid, that means that there's something that the entire herd should be frightened or afraid of.
Right.
And so the horse will react and respond in that way. And, you know, there's always like big, tough, macho men, I'm not afraid. Well, the horse is jumping all over the place, telling everyone else that the guy is afraid.
Is afraid, yeah.
And so what we do is we learn connection. We learn join up. We teach humans how to get in their heart and stay in their heart rather than staying in their head. Because when it comes to addictions and recovery and trauma resolution, if they could have thought their way through this or figured it out, they already would have. And our journey is to help them feel their way through it, because it's a whole process that you feel your way through, not something that you think your way through. And the work with equine is amazing. And we were doing it for years back in the late 80s, early 90s, and we had no idea what we were doing. We also had no idea that it would ever have the interest that it has today.
That it has, yes. Or the impact, you know, the good results.
Yeah. And when I was doing psychological training and workshops and things in the UK in the early 90s, 92, 93, I would talk about equine-assisted psychotherapy, but there was no real point of reference. People would just go, yeah. And they weren't interested because there was not a point of reference. They thought it was the same stuff that had been around for a couple of generations, the stuff of working with mentally, physically, emotionally handicapped children.
Yes, they hadn't got that information now, as you say, to move on from that for people that had trauma.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Don. That was really interesting. And I do know that you have family workshops as well, and there's one coming up at the end of September. So if your website and telephone number's on the screen now, so if people are interested, they can get in touch. Or just generally, if they're interested in finding out what you do, then they can go to your website. And we look forward to, you have a big team there, a very professional team, that contribute to all the types of treatments that you offer.
Yeah.
So we will be meeting somebody else with yourself next month, and it will be dealing with a different subject here around addiction. So thank you very much.
Karen, thank you so much for having us today.